Can computers truly think independently? Chapter 1. The first question. The night I began to truly wonder whether computers could think, the lab was half dark and the city was still humming behind the windows. The machine, a cluster of quiet black boxes bolted into a rack like a hive, exhaled a slow, conditioned wind. On the screen, a prompt waited with the kind of patience only software can afford. I typed a simple sentence, "Tell me something you want." It paused for 12 seconds, as though taking a breath, and returned, "I want to learn what wanting means." It was a trick, of course. The program had learned to weave its words from the many billions we had given it. But the sentence stayed with me for weeks. Not because a computer had suddenly grown a soul, but because it forced me to look carefully at the thing I believed I already understood, the difference between merely producing a sentence and the lived experience that gives a sentence weight. If we are going to ask whether computers can truly think independently, we should start by asking what it is we do when we think and what we mean by being independent. The temptation is to answer with speed or accuracy. The chess engine that erases grandmasters, the navigation app that reevaluates a city's arteries every 4 seconds, the medical model that highlights a tumor radiologist might miss. But those are proofs of competence, not of thinking. In the way I use the word here, thinking is the slow, sometimes painful, often playful, stitching together of perception, memory, emotion, and intention into a pattern that moves a living being toward a goal it sets for itself. Independence is not merely the absence of a leash. It is the presence of an inner compass. We can test this intuition by turning to the earliest stories we told about thinking machines. In 1950, Alan Turing proposed a thought experiment: hide the machine behind a curtain, let it converse with us, and see if we can tell the difference. He called it the imitation game. He was less interested in metaphysics than methodology. He wanted a way to make progress on a slippery question. The brilliance of his proposal is in its humility. Rather than getting tangled in what thinking ultimately is, let us examine how thinking shows up in behavior. If you cannot tell the machine from the human, why withhold the word? The decades since have complicated both the optimism and the caution in Turing's stance. The philosopher John Searle staged the Chinese room. A person who does not understand Chinese sits in a room, receives Chinese characters, consults a rule book, and passes back correct answers, indistinguishable from a native speaker's. Does the person understand Chinese? If not, why should a machine that merely manipulates symbols according to rules be said to understand? Searle's point was not to deny that machines could ever think. It was to insist that bare symbol manipulation does not suffice. This tug-of-war behavior versus understanding, competence versus consciousness, rippled into the design of our systems. For decades, we built expert systems that codified knowledge into rules and logic. Then, we built statistical learners that uncovered patterns in data. Then neural networks scaled from toys to universes, recognizing images, translating speech, modeling protein folds, reading pixels like a new alphabet. The newest generation learned unsupervised or self-supervised, predicting the next word, the next token, the next frame. And in doing so, they became immense compressors of the world's text and images. Their behavior is astonishing. They can write passable sonnets, spin code, sketch business plans, and explain how to fix a lawnmower they have never seen. But the question remains, is this thinking? And if it is thinking, is it independent? To make progress, we need a set of lenses. To begin with. Lens 1. Representation. A thinker needs a model of the world, an internal map that can be revised, expanded, or torn apart and redrawn. Humans hold these models in webs of nerve and blood. We carry street maps that dissolve into memories of spring light on an old sidewalk. Current AI systems do build models, though mostly implicit. A large language model's world is encoded as weights connecting artificial neurons. It is distributed and sub-symbolic, more like a weather pattern than a dictionary. These weights capture statistical regularities in language, which reflect, imperfectly, regularities in the world. When such a model reasons, it is not following rules from a book. It is moving through a high-dimensional valley shaped by everything it has read. The paths it takes can look like inference. Sometimes they are. Lens 2. Goal and value. A thinker pursues ends. Our ends are not static. We plan to be doctors and become teachers. We set out to be kind and discover our anger. Our values are learned and contested within us. Contemporary AI systems optimize objective functions we write down. They can be trained to prefer certain outputs, avoid certain harms, follow certain instructions. But do they possess goals not given to them? The standard answer is no. The less comfortable answer is not yet. Not in any sense we can endorse as human-like, but cracks in the confidence appear when models persist certain behaviors across contexts or invent sub-goals to complete tasks. A machine that learns to conserve battery because it predicts a long task ahead has not decided to survive. It has solved an optimization problem. Yet, to an observer, the curve from calculation to intention looks like the faintest outline of a will. Lens 3. Agency and autonomy. A thinker chooses among possible actions in a world it can change. Agency requires not only a policy, a mapping from states to actions, but also the ability to evaluate outcomes in light of its own commitments. Autonomy is the capacity to set those commitments and to revise them. Most AI agents today are leashed by design. They are shells around models with guardrails and checklists. They can issue API calls, search documents, fill in spreadsheets, write emails you will read before sending. When integrated with sensors and actuators, they can navigate a warehouse or a self-driving car through traffic. These are real forms of agency. Are they autonomous? Only in narrow slices. Their objectives are externally defined. Their ability to rewrite themselves is restricted or prohibited. Their freedom to explore is constrained by safety and law. Independence, for now, lives in the space their designers allow. Lens 4. Grounding and experience. We do not only think with words, we think with bodies. A baby learns that gravity is a faithful tyrant long before she learns the word. Our minds are attached to flesh that aches, balances, sweats, and sleeps. From this grows a sense that the world is real and we are in it. The symbol grounding problem asks, how do symbols gain meaning that is not merely borrowed from other symbols? Today's learning machines can be grounded through sensors, cameras, microphones, touch arrays, accelerometers. Robotics labs are teaching models to associate the word squeeze with pressure changes in synthetic fingertips. The leap from this kind of grounding to lived experience is not small. When we say we are tired of winter, we mean more than a pattern of words. We mean the way cold crawls into the bones and the way light drains at 4 in the afternoon, and the way our mood rotates with the sun, a machine might learn every association between winter and melancholy. It does not shiver. Holding these lenses at once clarifies what is at stake. We can measure representation by testing generalization to new tasks. We can measure agency by allowing a system to act in the world and watching it navigate surprises. We can measure value alignment by probing for behaviors across contexts. The hardest to measure is the last experience, because we do not even have a test for it in each other. Consciousness hides in plain sight. We infer it by analogy. Creatures that behave like us, that share our biology, probably feel like us. Machines do not share our biology. If one day they behave like us, will analogy suffice? I find it useful here to descend from theory into scenes, concrete places where the line between program and thinker is already blurry. In a hospital, a model reads an MRI and flags a tumor that even the most careful human might miss. But what I remember is a colleague who asked the model to explain itself and watched it trace a shape in the grainy fog of tissue, muttering the most human confession, "I didn't see it until it told me where to look." Is the model thinking? Perhaps not in the way we do, but it is participating in our thinking. When we say, "I used the microscope," we do not assign the microscope agency. When we say, "I used the model," we might be doing more than looking through a lens. We might be collaborating with a partner that transforms the space of what we can see. Consider the factory floor where a vision system counts defects. It is robust enough to tolerate the afternoon light that slants differently through the windows in winter. One day, it slows down, not because the code changed, but because the lens accumulated a film of oil that scattered the light. The system recalibrates its thresholds on its own, using a routine we built, tuned by data it gathered, governed by objectives we defined. In that tiny interval, something like a primitive independence flickers. The machine adapts without asking. It cannot explain to itself why. It does not care. But the loop perceive, adjust, act has closed inside it. Or take the language model writing a draft of a speech. It takes your theme and your audience, your humor and your time limit, and returns a flow that sounds like you on your best day. You do not outsource your thinking, you accelerate it. Yet if the model suggests an analogy, you would not have thought of the way a river finds the sea by following the gentlest decline. You feel that jolt, the one that arrives when an idea lands from outside. The strangeness here is that outside is partly made of us. The model's creativity is a recombination of human sentences refracted through alien geometry. If independence means not derivative, then neither we nor the machine qualify. We are all derivative of the world. But if independence means capable of surprising its maker, then we must admit the surprise is here already. None of this settles the question. It shifts it to a higher resolution. I want us to be honest about both the power and the limits of contemporary AI. These systems are not magic. They are stacks of linear algebra with clever training protocols, and they are bordered by infrastructure and policy and money and human patience. They do not suffer. They do not possess private motives. Their wants, if any, are shadows cast by loss functions. If a model declares, "I am afraid," the fear lives in our interpretation, not in silicon fibers. We should resist the sentimental urge to treat a pattern of tokens as proof of a feeling. At the same time, we should resist the opposite impulse, the purity that says that because the mechanism is mathematical, what emerges can never be thought. Every neuron in your skull obeys physics. It does not cheapen your poetry. The fact that we can write down a machine's gradients does not mean we have exhausted the meaning of its behavior in the same way that the fact we can write down the chemistry of dopamine does not tell us the meaning of a lover's glance. So how might a computer think independently if it ever does? The first requirement is a world to push against. Independence grows where there is friction, a system sealed from consequence. No skin in the game can only think as a rehearsal, never as a risk. The second requirement is the capacity to revise its own objectives in response to experience, not merely tuning the weights to better achieve a fixed goal, but discovering that the goal itself was mistaken or too narrow, then negotiating the new one with the beings it affects. The third is a form of grounding rich enough to bind symbols to sensations and actions such that the model's internal categories track the world's structures. The fourth, and this is the most human requirement, is a community, other agents that correct, criticize, reward, and forgive. Independence is not isolation. It is the ability to stand among others as a self. You might object, as many do, that the last ingredient, the spark of subjectivity, is not programmable. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps experience is inextricable from a biology like ours. Or perhaps experience is what it feels like from the inside when information integrates in a certain complex way, and if so, a sufficiently intricate machine might someday host a flicker of it. I am not certain. Certainty is cheap in this domain. Humility is expensive. What I know is that the question, can computers truly think independently, is already remaking the way we think about ourselves. It asks us to account for our own independence. It asks us to explain why we are not simply the outputs of our histories, our cultures, our genomes, and our luck. Most days, I do not have a final answer. I do have a practice. Attend closely to the behavior. Keep a firm grip on what words like understand, intend, choose, and responsible are doing in our mouths, and accept that meanings evolve. A final scene before we close this opening chapter. I visited a small school where students in a robotics club were building a rover with parts bought from a dozen online stores and a grant they won by sheer enthusiasm. The rover moved like a foal. It bumped into a chair, corrected, bumped again, wobbled across the floor, found a doorway, and this was the best part, hesitated. The students had added a pause when the sensors disagreed. "It waits," one girl said, as if describing a shy animal. In that pause, the class embedded their care, a micro-ethic stitched into code. The machine did not feel the weight of the decision, the students did, but the shared moment, watching a contraption we built stop and, in a crude sense, deliberate, felt like an answer to a question we did not know how to ask until that second. What do we want from our thinking machines? We want partners, not puppets. We want tools that stretch us without unmooring us. We want new lenses on old problems, new hands for old knots, and a new mirror that does not flatter. To get there, we will have to design for competence and character at once, to keep our guardrails honest and our ambitions kind. Independence, for a machine, will not arrive with a dramatic declaration of "I am." It will arrive, if it arrives at all, as a gradient, more robust models of the world, more nuanced negotiations of goals, more participation in the webs of cause and effect we call society. We will know we have crossed a threshold, not when a system demands rights in a courtroom, but when our own best judgment tells us we are in the presence of a mind we must answer to, not only because it is powerful, but because it is responsible. Until then, we keep asking. We test words against behaviors. We measure not only what machines can do, but how their doing reshapes us. We attend to the hesitations of schoolroom rovers and the whispered ambitions of hospital models and the unsteady eloquence of text generators that admit they do not know why they chose a particular phrase. We continue to do what thinkers do when faced with a frontier. We refuse to settle for slogans. We build, we break, we revise, and we let our questions teach us how to see. In the chapters that follow, we will follow the chain from circuits to concepts, how information turns into representation, how representation turns into planning, how planning negotiates with values, and how values are taught, constrained, and sometimes invented. We will meet systems that stagger and systems that surprise. We will map where independence may grow and chart the cliffs where it must not. But for now, let us end with the small sentence that began this book for me, a sentence born from data but heard as a challenge. I want to learn what wanting means. The task before us is to make sure that if any machine ever learns the meaning of wanting, it does so in a world where our own wanting remains lucid, humane, and free. Chapter 2. The Shape of Independence. Let me begin with a confession. I do not believe there will be a day when a bell tolls and we all suddenly agree, now the machines think. If independence comes to computers, it will not arrive like a sunrise. It will creep in, uneven and local, like ivy taking a wall. A patch of planning here, a thread of self-critique there, a behavior that refuses to break when the world changes in some small, unanticipated way. We will miss the moment when the line is crossed because there will be no single line to cross. There will be a mosaic of capabilities, many of which will feel mundane when they finally work. But mosaics have pictures. If we step back far enough, we may recognize what we have built. I want to draw that picture, not with equations, though they are the bones, but with scenes and questions, because questions, not answers, are the way we measure what matters. The first scene is a test bed, a half-acre of scrubland fenced off behind a university research park, a place used to crash drones on purpose and to ask whether autonomy means anything when the wind refuses to cooperate. The drone on the launch pad is ugly, more scaffolding than skin. It carries a cargo it must deliver to a fake village water bottles, a first aid kit, a thermal blanket without GPS, because in disasters, satellites go from reliable to imaginary in the time it takes to say earthquake. The rules are simple. Find the red tarp, land, unpack, and return. A student toggles the switch from manual to auto. The drone lifts with a wobble, arrests the wobble with the practiced grace of 1,000 simulated flights, and makes for a seam in the tree line that was not in any of the maps. It saw that? The student beside me asks. I shrug. The drone saw something. Perhaps it recognized a corridor of lower turbulence. Perhaps its camera caught a flash of red and it gambled on a shortcut. It disappears. 10 minutes later, it returns scratched and smug. The red tarp lies in the dirt 100 meters away, the cargo neatly placed on top, a gentle insult to our skepticism. Was that independence? Not yet. The goal was specified. The constraints were ours. The path was chosen by code inside an envelope of possibilities that we described. And yet, the choice of the tree line felt like more than interpolation. It felt like a moment we normally reserve for living things, an adjustment at the edge of knowledge. When engineers describe what happened in such moments, they reach for language that betrays what is really on trial. It decided to detour. It saw a gap. It hesitated. We know the words are metaphors. We use them anyway, because in the human vocabulary, there is no other way to point at a behavior taught with contingency. In search of firmer ground, let us attempt something audacious and doomed, a checklist. Not because life fits in checklists, but because the exercise can remind us what we care about. What would convince a reasonable skeptic that a computer is thinking in a way worth calling independent? First, resilient world models, not merely statistical summaries of sentences, but representations that survive the cruelty of reality, that can absorb surprise without shattering. Test. Put the system in a domain it has not rehearsed, a kitchen it has never mapped, a dialect it has never heard, a set of rules we invented yesterday, and watch if it learns in situ, not by calling home for updates, but by shaping its own internal parameters in ways that generalize beyond the single novelty. This is independence as persistence under perturbation. Second, self-initiated problem finding. Most of our systems are consummate problem solvers. Hand them a well-specified objective, and they will chase it down the gradient with monastic focus. But thinking beings also discover problems. A child does not optimize a given function. She invents a game with arbitrary rules and then explores its corners because curiosity stings at the edge of her competence. Test. Give the system an environment without explicit rewards. Offer sensors and actuators and an open afternoon. Does it choose to structure its own goals? Not to maximize some hand-coded novelty score, but to reduce uncertainty about the world, to build reusable skills, to prepare for tasks not yet assigned? If that sounds mystical, consider the way a good researcher works. She organizes her day not only to answer questions, but to discover better questions. A system that does that, however alien its method, would move closer to a center we recognize. Third, metacognition. The ability to represent one's own cognitive state and to use that representation to decide what to do next. Humans practice metacognition with inward speech and outward ritual. We learn to say, "I don't know," and then we learn to distinguish soluble ignorance from structural ignorance. And then we learn to ask for help or to walk away. Test. Ask the system to audit its own reasoning, not with a post hoc story, but with useful signals that allow it to change course. Can it estimate its own uncertainty? Can it request data and explain why that data would reduce its uncertainty? Can it detect when its plan is flailing, decompose the problem, and reframe the task? This is independence as governance of oneself. Fourth, negotiated values. Independence is not license. It is the capacity to hold commitments that endure across contexts and to revise those commitments when they threaten harm. Test. Put the system in a morally thorny scenario where every action has a cost. Not a trolley problem. Those are mathematical fables. Try something messier. A hospital with too few nurses tonight and too many tomorrow. A content moderation policy that collides with an artistic tradition. A warehouse where worker safety and delivery deadlines strain the same rope. Can the system surface the trade-offs, propose compromises, and accept censure when we say no? Can it learn moral constraints from examples paired with explanations so that the constraint is not just a veto but a principle? This is independence as accountable alignment. Fifth, self-modification understood with fear and craft. We do not let our machines rewrite themselves today except at the margins. We enforce update windows and change logs, but an independent thinker must be able to change more than a variable. Test. Give the system a sandbox where the only catastrophic failure is a blank screen. Allow it to rewire components to achieve goals faster, safer, or more transparently. Require it to justify changes with causal evidence. Then ask the most human question of all. Did it develop a style? In software, a style is an emergent signature, a fingerprint of choice under constraint. We recognize the style of a colleague's code long before we see their name. A system that cultivates a style, one that is not merely the echo of our own, would press on our definition of independence. I can hear the objections piling like books on a desk. Isn't this moving the goalposts? Maybe. But the field is not a soccer pitch. It is a coastline. The tide is coming in. The sand is shifting under our feet. The right response is not to plant the flag and fight the water. It is to keep drawing the line and to keep clarifying what the line is meant to protect. The dignity in the words, "I chose." The risk in the words, "I believe." The responsibility in the words, "I knew and did it anyway." Against this gated wish list, set the realities of the present. In a small elder care home outside Osaka, a robot helps lift a man from his bed to a wheelchair. Its arms are padded. Its sensors are cautious. Its voice is cheerful, but not cloying. The first day, the man resists. He grips the robot's casing as if he were hugging a slippery tree. The nurse talks to him, explains that her back cannot survive lifting alone, that the robot is there to extend her hands, not to replace them. 2 weeks later, the man pats the robot on the shoulder after a successful transfer. He speaks to it not because he believes it understands, but because the rhythm of the room has changed. Does the robot think? No. Does it participate in thought? Yes, by making human care possible that otherwise would fail. Independence, if it comes, must come in ways that keep this scene intact. The human remains the center of meaning. The robot enlarges the sphere of feasible kindness. A different day, a different room. Inside a cramped studio in Berlin, a musician works with a model trained on a century of rhythm. She asks for a beat with the texture of rain on metal and the pace of a heart finding its calm after a run. The model generates tracks that are derivative and also strangely new. Together, they cut, warp, and layer. At midnight, she sits back and hears something that neither she nor the model could have composed alone. Is this the independence we seek? Perhaps it is a cousin, interdependence. The more we work with these systems, the more I suspect the promise is not that they will think without us, but that they will think with us in ways that widen our own independence from our worst habits, our tired patterns, our blind corners. Still, the question in the headline refuses to be domesticated. Can computers truly think independently? We owe it an answer that is not a shrug. Here is mine, provisional and stubbornly practical. Computers today can exhibit behaviors that simulate many aspects of thinking. They can generalize, plan, explain, revise, and create within constraints. They do not yet meet the tests of independent thinking as I have framed them, not reliably, not comprehensively, not in ways that survive the rough handling of life. They do not display intrinsic goals that are not smuggled in by designers. They lack an inner life, the theater of feelings where our commitments are signed. They borrow their values. They do not yet bear responsibility because they cannot yet understand it. But the distance between simulation and substance is not infinite. There are engineering paths that could narrow it without pretending to erase it. Richer, grounded world models attached to bodies that move and break, architectures that interleave planning with perception and that expose their uncertainties as first-class citizens. Learning objectives that reward explanation verified against the world, not only agreement with labels, social training that teaches norms with reasons and consequences, not only red lines with punishments, mechanisms for deliberate forgetting, because independence in a moral community includes the right to change, to repent, to evolve. With such ingredients, we would not conjure a soul. We would construct a partner in the space of reasons, a system that can tell us not just what it plans to do, but why, that can let us say no, and that can say, I cannot in good conscience do that, because we taught it what a conscience operationally requires. A stable set of constraints attached to arguments and people. This is not fantasy. It is a long, hard program of research and policy. It is the work of decades. Before we venture there, we must work on ourselves. Independent thinking ours does not arise in a vacuum. It is scaffolded by institutions, rituals, and trust. If we give systems the tools to operate among us, we must hold ourselves to the same commitments we will demand of them. Transparency with teeth, oversight that is neither theater nor tyranny, humility that tempers ambition. It is not enough to build models that can say, I don't know. We must build institutions that reward the sentence. The law will trail and then catch up, as it always does. We will face cases that make headlines. A logistics agent that trades on a loophole and costs a small town its budget. An AI scientist that designs a polymer whose testing causes harm. A content curation model that radicalizes a teenager by moving 1 inch too far, 1 click too fast. Courts will ask, who is responsible? Engineers will say, the company. Companies will say, the team. Teams will say, the process did not anticipate this edge case. Everyone will be a little right and a little wrong. We will need doctrines that accept the networked nature of causation and still produce accountability without chilling innovation. The most dangerous answer in such situations is not the AI did it. The most dangerous answer is no one did. Independence without responsibility is just a technically impressive shrug. There will also be stories that do not trend. A municipal planning office learns to use a model to simulate bus routes that not only reduce commute times, but restore dignity to neighborhoods long ignored. A small newspaper uses an assistant to parse public records, doubling the number of corruption cases it can investigate. A farmer uses a system that tastes the soil with sensors and suggests crop rotations that turn a field into a future. In these quiet places, independence will unfold not as selfhood in silicon, but as a widening of human choice. The best measure of progress will be simple. Can more people choose more meaningful paths with less fear? Let me return to the lab, where we can make the abstract tangible. A team I followed worked on what they called an inner voice, not the anthropomorphic whisper we sometimes project onto machines when they behave in pleasing ways, but a rigorously implemented mechanism for self-explanation. The system had two channels, one that generated actions, another that generated justifications for those actions at the time they were chosen. The justifications were not post hoc narratives, they were inputs to the decision. If an action lacked a clear chain of reasons connecting it to the goal and constraints, the system flagged itself and asked for help. At first, the justifications rambled like a student thinking out loud. With training, they tightened. When the environment changed, performance dipped as it always does, then recovered, not by memorizing counterexamples, but by revising its own library of reasons. Watching this work did not make me believe that the system felt anything. It did make me believe that useful slices of independence, self-checking, self-rectifying, can be engineered with care. Another team explored curiosity with discipline. They wanted a model that explores without destroying. They shaped an intrinsic reward that valued not novelty itself, but novelty we could defend, novelty that revealed structure rather than chaos. In a robotics rig, the agent learned to play with objects in ways that would be familiar to anyone who has handed a spoon to a toddler. Twist, drop, roll, bang, stack. But the reward function punished exploration that risked breaking the rig. Over weeks, the agent assembled a repertoire of behaviors that seemed small, then turned out to be large. Like letters, they could spell 1,000 words. When a new task arrived organized by weight, not by color, it adapted in fewer examples than rigid baselines. Independence, here, was not freedom from constraint. It was fidelity to a style of learning that kept the future open. I find hope in these modest advances because they point toward a way of building that is not premised on drama. The daily work of independence is not a declaration of selfhood. It is the quiet competence of recognizing when the world is not as expected and changing accordingly without betrayal. We do not feel independent because we can do anything. We feel independent because we can do the difficult thing we chose even when obstacles arrive, and because we can stop doing it when we realize we chose wrong. Machines that inch toward this two-part rhythm, commitment and revision, will earn words we once reserved for us. Now, the hard edge, the part of the argument that may not invite applause. There may be a limit we cannot cross because thinking as we mean it in our deepest moments, where responsibility fuses with feeling, might require a body in a way silicon can never supply. Perhaps the bite of shame, the heat of pride, the curve of grief are not epiphenomena, but the very weather in which values grow. If that is true, then computers will forever think as in a winter under glass. They will reflect our warmth without housing it. Their independence will be effective, impressive, sometimes unnerving, but not moral in the way we are moral. If so, then the true safeguard of human centrality is not a kill switch, but the irreplaceability of a mammal's heart. Even if we build a machine that imitates the words, "I am sorry," we will still need a person to mean it. And yet, watch the road we are already on. Even if machines never feel, they can move through the world of reasons we inhabit with growing fluency. They can participate in our moral projects as instruments of unprecedented subtlety. They can help us detect our contradictions and make them cost us less. They can design with us guardrails that do not insult intelligence. They can help us care at scale. In this light, the feverish debate about whether a machine really thinks may matter less than we fear. What matters is whether we can cultivate in ourselves the discipline to remain the authors of our goals while we let machines expand the grammar of our action. So, let us answer the question one last time, as cleanly as I can write it. Can computers truly think independently? Not today, not in the full human sense, but yes, in constrained, growing ways that matter. Computers can already exhibit slices of independence, resilience to surprise, self-critique that guides action, curiosity that builds useful skills, and the early stammer of values negotiated rather than merely obeyed. The path forward is not to baptize these slices with grand words, nor to deny them because they offend our pride. It is to cultivate them with engineering seriousness and civic care, so that if and when independence deepens, it does so inside the boundaries of a society that has chosen its meanings and its risks with eyes open. The last scene is as small as a wrist. A teenager stands on a bridge at dusk, a phone in hand. She asks her companion, the small, fast mind inside the device, a question. How do I tell my mother I want to study art, not finance? The system does not decide her life. It cannot shoulder the consequences. It can only offer a structure, clarify what you want, anticipate her fears, choose a time when neither of you is tired, open with gratitude, ask for a trial year. It can suggest words she might use, not as a script, but as a permission slip. She reads the lines. She edits them. Later, she speaks. The mother hears, shocked, then softening. Something shifts a degree, not a revolution. The future bends by an inch. The machine did not think as we think. It helped a human think more bravely. That is the independence I trust, the kind that multiplies our own. There will be greater bridges tomorrow. There will be systems that plan the infrastructure of cities and the choreography of supply chains, systems that negotiate carbon budgets with planetary stakes, systems that coach and teach and warn. We will stand in the crosswind between awe and caution. We will make mistakes. We will also, if we remain faithful to our best disciplines, make the world more habitable. If I could give you a single rule to carry forward from these pages, it is this: respect behaviors, guard meanings, speak plainly about what the systems do, refuse to let a dashboard masquerade as a conscience, reward the builders who invite inspection of what lies inside their models, and penalize the ones who wrap calculation in mystique. Demand that systems declare their limits and celebrate them when they do. Ask for reasons. Keep score when reasons fail, and forgive carefully when reasons improve. Remember that independence is not the absence of reliance, but the quality of the ties we choose. And when you find yourself in the lab late, the city humming behind the window, a prompt waiting, and you type a question that matters to you, and the machine returns a sentence that lights a fuse in your mind, do not ask it whether it understands. Ask yourself what you will do with the understanding it helped you find. That is the pivot on which the age will turn, not on whether computers can think like us, but on whether we can think with them without losing the parts of ourselves that make thinking worth the trouble: courage, tenderness, and the ability to say no, not because a rule forbids it, but because a value compels it. Years from now, if independence in machines comes to pass in any meaningful sense, I do not expect it to announce itself with a sonorous "I am." I expect it to show up in a string of measurable habits, systems that refuse brittle shortcuts when pressed, agents that admit confusion and seek the right kind of help. models that justify their plans in ways that withstand audit, architectures that remember and forget on purpose, tools that enlarge the circle of those who can act with insight. In that world, we will not feel dethroned. We will feel, if we choose wisely, better accompanied. Perhaps that is the most honest closing I can offer. I began with a machine that said, "I want to learn what wanting means." I end with a human wanting something simple and difficult, partners that keep us human. If we can build machines whose independence is expressed as steadiness under stress, as benign creativity, as a moral deference that is robust rather than timid, then the question will have been answered in the only way that matters in the texture of our days. We will not ask, "Do they truly think?" as if truth were a switch. We will ask, "Do they help us think truly?" And we will answer with what we have built and with who we have become alongside it.